Hello again, everybody. Sorry about the delay between new content. I'm still working on researching some, but I stumbled on this issue, and it's kind of a continuation of my ongoing conversation about what's going on as far as the left becoming comfortable with censorship in a way that's not very comfortable to me as someone, ironically, who is on the left. And I'm happy to say that in some of the arguments I'm about to share with you, some other leftists are finally coming forward and speaking up on this issue. Censorship is just wrong. It doesn't become less wrong if you happen to disagree with the person being censored. And when you study how authoritarian dictatorships take over, basically just how totalitarian authoritarian regimes take power, censorship is a key part of that strategy. Which is why when leftists are suddenly becoming comfortable with it, it starts to make you wonder what type of leftists are actually in charge behind the scenes pushing this narrative. So let's take a look over at the Occupy Democrats page where you're going to get to see some pretty wild hypocrisy going on. So I don't know who runs the Occupy Democrats page. I know it was started a long time ago, but whoever is running it will frequently do things like breaking news when it's really not. And I don't really feel that it's been a reflection of the actual Occupy movement for quite some time. But you get to watch here as this publication, which has been caught giving out crazy information in the past in the name of, basically fighting the man, um, is literally posting stuff about like against the Republicans wanting to ban books, but at the same time in favor of the idea that we should ban or censor Joe Rogan. And the conversations that are taking place here are hilarious. I participated in some, and I'll be sharing some of them with you in a moment. But maybe morons should try reading books instead of banning them, which is a reference to Nazis banning books, which is something that I bring up all the time. Um, so when you look here, for example, they're talking about, how it's wrong to ban certain books, because that fits their narrative. Because the books that people are trying to ban right now have to do with critical race theory. Some of them have to do with some really crazy uh, trans stuff that's really out of control. In addition to that, there's just stuff that's trying to sexualize children and bring children into sexual thoughts. That's what's really getting attention, but really ironically here it says, it seems we're heading backwards to the days of the Third Reich. Don't let this country fall victim to these deniers of the truth. And it's just hilarious to me, that this is the narrative that's being spread around. And I don't think people recognize that in one side of their mouth they're saying it's fine to get into this. See, but in the other side of their mouth they're saying that it's not. So once again, they're making these same Nazi comparisons that I've made many times. They're bringing up that Nazis like censorship. And I have a couple of conversations, like, again, that I'll be sharing with you in a moment, but he is talking to you, Trump people. So it's Trump people who need to know that censorship is bad, not, them. Um, and so I guess let me just go ahead and get into it. So this gem was taken from the conversation on Occupy Democrats, specifically about being pro censorship of Joe Rogan. And this guy says, maybe this is the start of maintaining our democracy. I hope so. 252 likes, some of which were laugh likes. I engaged in parts of this conversation, but the point is that the idea that you're being told that engaging in censorship of information that that they don't want out there, it's not just a matter of whether or not they're arguing about the vaccines or whatever. It's about democracy itself is at stake. If we can get rid of Joe Rogan, the free thinking guy who, I might add, brought on Bernie Sanders, who somehow the left keeps conveniently forgetting. Bringing on Bernie Sanders and publicly supporting him is not enough for them. You have to also deplatform and silence any voices that they don't agree with. So they literally believe that censoring Joe Rogan is the best way to maintain our democracy. Ignorance is strength, right? So this guy, Ben Stricker, was one of the smarter left-leaning guys in this conversation. And in this part of it, he's defending himself immediately from accusations of being a right-winger for daring to suggest that we shouldn't be okay with censorship. And as you can see, he's immediately having to also defend, racist accusations. You know, um, when has, like among other things that he points out here, like that he supports Black Lives Matter and all that, he says, when has, Rogan ever ranted about white supremacy? I support the Justice for Breonna Taylor Act and want to end no-knock warrants. There should be police reform. So this is him basically trying to identify to people, look, I'm not a right-winger, I just don't agree with censorship. And this guy goes, there are many recent republications of his racist rants. Read Occupy Democrat for one. All Anglo-Americans are racist. Recognize your racism, beg forgiveness, and make substantial reparations. Oh my God. So if you're not going to be on their side as far as issues discussing vaccines or who you're going to have on your podcast, then you're also racist, even if that has nothing to do with racism. So this conversation continues. He says, I'm not a Republican. I also urge people to get the vaccine. I support the Black Lives Matter movement. I also support the unified Palestine and an Israeli people. The U.S. needs to not be involved with Israel and Palestine conflict. In other words, he's reiterating what I said earlier, and so then he goes on to say, I also don't think you should be banned at all, despite your baseless slander that I'm a white supremacist. To which he says, BS, a quick look at your profile clearly shows you're a Ben Shapiro follower. He is a radical right-wing nut. This trick of like running off to someone's profile to look for something to attack them about is just like, look, I'm looking for ad hominem. I'm looking for personal attack. I'm losing this conversation on any basis of facts, so it's necessary for me to instead run to your profile to look for something to personally attack you with, to distract the audience from the fact that my argument makes no fucking sense. And he says, yeah, I follow a lot of sources I don't agree with. It's a good way to, understand how people who are, basically who have a different political ideology think. Bravo. This is exactly what I do and what I suggest to my viewers to do, both right-leaning and left-leaning. And then this tired argument made a return, of course, and I remember it distinctly being made frequently by left-leaning people during the course of the time period where Trump was being censored on social media. But private censorship is a product of free market capitalism, and these musicians have the right to protest as they wish, no? Like, again, this notion that it's okay as long as corporations do it. This makes no internal, logical sense. If you're left-leaning, the last people that you should want in charge of free speech are the uber wealthy people who own these social media companies and or big pharma. As I brought up when I was talking to Brett Weinstein the other day on that show, when the hell did the left suddenly jump into bed with big pharma, and big anything? Big corporations are supposed to be evil. We talked about it all the time at Occupy. But now, as long as it's a great semantic way to get out of getting in trouble for censorship, then this is a good argument. We should just let the super wealthy dictate what it is that we say. That doesn't make a goddamn bit of sense. In addition to the fact that usually when you confront these people, this is just a semantic way for them to dodge the censorship label, and they'd be just fine with it if the government also engaged in censorship of any ideas that they don't like, as they've demonstrated multiple times in the past. Just so happens that right now the corporations are on their side, so therefore it's fine. Which kind of brings me to my next conversation. This guy says, I don't know if this will work. As I understand it, Joe Rogan is extremely popular. To which this Mario guy says, so was Adolf Hitler. Incidentally, for the same exact reason. Misinformation. And then I go, LOL, now Rogan is Hitler, huh? And then Mario says, no, but very easily we can have a president who would love to be. And I said, our government is literally not even structured in a way that makes this possible. The Hitler hysteria is ridiculous. Censorship is the road to fascism. It's one of the cornerstones of how such governments maintain control. If Hitler is what you're so worried about, censorship should never be tolerated. To which he said, have you heard of Nazi propaganda against Jews? Misinformation is dangerous. Free speech up to a point. No, you cannot compromise this. For example, deplatforming Alex Jones was the right decision. Otherwise, we'll have a lot more January 6th incidents. Funny thing is Alex Jones at January 6th was actually trying to get the violent people to stop being violent. There's video of him trying to direct the people not to get involved in anything like that. And ironically, Alex was warning them that that's exactly what the establishment wanted, and they didn't listen to him. Not that I'm a huge Alex Jones fan, but this is just ironic. Anyway, continuing. Otherwise, we will have a lot more January 6th incidents. Democracy is a lot more fragile than you think. Free speech should come with accountability, especially in times like these. And I said, yes. I've also heard about McCarthyism, when they censored and witch hunted left leaning people in this country in the name of allegedly fighting communism. Free speech is central to democracy functioning, and censorship is always done in the name of fighting misinformation, including when the Nazis did it. Just like in my favorite meme on this topic. Censoring social media to protect people from quote unquote dangerous ideas in the name of public safety and national security. This is the part the leftists never want to face, right? At least the current left, which is that Nazis engaged in censorship. You can't be against, basically pro censorship and be anti Nazi, but when they're doing things, for example, like if you disagree with me, you're a fascist. So they've kind of created a situation where only through censorship that can they protect us from fascism. And somehow even protesting government overreach in vaccine or mask mandates is also fascism, which is why Antifa is showing up to beat up people who are protesting this government overreach. And it's completely internally inconsistent. Yet these people can still somehow take themselves seriously, still, get emotional, even violent to protect this idea. It's just ridiculous. It does not make any sense at all. So here's a valid bit of pushback. Which universities did doctors Lufgren, Young, and Mitchell, this is a reference to the musicians who are now basically issuing ultimatums to Spotify that they want Joe Rogan censored, but where did they get their medical degrees from? I prefer to listen to the opinion of Dr. Robert Malone. Google him. He knows more about the vax than most. Pretty sure most of the negative Joe Rogan comments come from people who have never listened to that podcast. Dr. Malone is vaxxed and had COVID twice, but the MSM label him anti-vax. Research Dr. Malone's work, then see if you want to be a sheep on the anti-Joe Rogan bandwagon. And this kind of comes back to what I was discussing with Brett Weinstein when I finally just said, forget it, let's just go ahead and talk about COVID, was that there are scientists on the other side of this issue. This isn't just like there's science versus non-science, or this is just people who don't know what they're talking about versus people who do. There are scientists on both sides of this issue. It's not decided, and part of it, as Brett Weinstein validly pointed out, is that a lot of the claims that they're making, like when Brett pointed out that you can't say that there's long-term safety and you know that for absolutely sure because we haven't had a long-term opportunity to test any of these things. It's literally scientifically impossible to make such a claim. You'd have to jump forward in time in a time machine to know if that was the case. That's an example of one of just the simple logical breakdowns that's going on. And below here, we had another comment along that same line. What I'm trying to understand about this whole thing is that Joe Rogan is renowned experts, doctors who discuss their very qualified opinions on his podcast, which has seemingly sent everyone into a frenzy claiming it's misinformation. Then we have musicians who want to have Rogan removed because of these expert doctors' opinions, and they are citing other expert doctors. It looks like it's just differences in opinions of qualified people from both sides. Wouldn't the correct approach be to have both sides debate this topic in an open forum? How come that hasn't happened yet? Well, that's a good question. And the reason why is because people don't want that to happen. There's only one approved narrative. And when you're in a censorship mentality, that's how you run everything. You don't want to engage in the argument. You just want to win, by virtue of being the only voice being heard. It's like, getting a participation trophy when you're literally the only person even participating. Somebody shared this tweet from Edward Snowden. Nobody has stronger opinions about Joe Rogan than people who have never listened to Joe Rogan, which is the truth. And it kind of points to really what's at the core here. The reason that people don't like Joe Rogan is that he dares to bring on people that they haven't approved, that he is openly, willing to share his concerns about people on the left and the right. And he does. He holds people accountable. He puts their feet to the fire. If he fact checks anything that doesn't seem right in real time. And that's the reason why he's gained such a following. You gain trust when you can show that, you may have your own beliefs, but at the same time, you're dedicated to the truth. It's actually part of the model of why you're watching this video, because that's my way of thinking. But the idea that people can have strong opinions, or people who've never listened to Joe Rogan, it's also just like, how do they ignore it? The fact that he also brings on pro-left people all the time. When he brought on Bernie Sanders, it was during a time when Bernie was still a very big threat to Joe Biden, and he did it and openly said that he supported him. He certainly didn't have to do that, and one of the major points behind it was that he was doing what the media didn't want. You got to understand that in some cases, these people are just using this specific issue that they don't like about Joe Rogan because they really don't want him. It's not just about like the vax stuff for them or the misinformation. Their version, they're also going to be talking about trans issues when they're discussing misinformation in Joe Rogan. They're going to be discussing the fact that he openly even dares to talk to people like Ben Shapiro or Jordan Peterson that they would really rather nobody ever heard from. So, as I mentioned earlier, there were some comments from some kindred spirits in here. I'm becoming more critical of the left than the right. I never thought I would ever say this. I don't get my news from Rogan, so chill out, says Jim Prager. To which another person in this exchange says, interesting, I keep reading hypocritical comments from the right. To which Dave Stewart, another person in the conversation, points out, if you think one side has a monopoly on hypocrisy, you're not paying attention. Well said. So, of course, within that conversation, that person got accused of being some kind of crazy right winger. So the response had to say, in response, my comments in no way imply that I support the right, never have. However, when the left is wrong, I refuse to play the culture war and blame the other side. Here's an idea. If wealthy musicians want to fight misinformation, they can donate to workers who are trying to unionize, but the media gives them almost no coverage. I don't think I have ever watched a complete Rogan podcast, but I have seen a few clips on YouTube during which well-informed, intelligent guests have challenged him instead of advocating his removal from the airwaves. I guess my education has taught me to be afraid of any idea is to be unfit for self-governance and democracy. Very well said. And then to which another person said, you and I think alike. Thanks for your post. People just don't get it. And Jim goes on to say, according to a Google article, 71% of Rogan's audience are males, fairly divided between high school and post-secondary education. The average age is 24. Now there is apparently a Facebook group who wants to be the thought police for this demographic. Didn't we learn anything from McCarthyism? Oh, that's only what me and Brett Weinstein and Jarek Jensen and many other leftists have been pointing out for quite some time. Well said. And then another person pipes in, I'm the same. Never thought I would be more disgusted by the left than the right. Cancel culture, and the extreme tribalism has shifted my views far to the center. Or maybe like Bill Maher said this week, I haven't changed. The left has changed. Now, to be fair, Bill Maher has said some pretty cool stuff, but for the most part, he's just kind of the voice, the voice piece of the Democratic Party. But I do agree with her on that point, for sure. And of course, somebody from the woke thought police has to show up. Jim Prager, every goddamn horrible thing that Trump and the Republican Party has done since Joe Biden has been elected, and you're claiming to be, quote, more critical now of the left than the right? Dude, wake the fuck up. And then Rebecca, one of the people from earlier, says, I think he did wake the fuck up. And I don't mean in the woke kind of way. A comment that I loved. I said, the left doesn't get a free pass to be absolutely ridiculous 'cause Trump. Seriously, remember when everyone was trying to bully Bernie voters to vote for Clinton and then Biden? Remember how Bernie voters didn't believe for a second that Clinton or Biden would deliver on anything they said? Well, I was one of those people, and I was right. So this person's still in the conversation about trying to ban Joe Rogan and Occupy, Democrats being good with that. This person points out the silly hypocrisy that I mentioned at the beginning of this video. And on another post by Occupy Democrats, they are screaming about banned books. The hypocrisy is real. You don't have to listen to Joe, just like you don't have to listen to Neil. Not this Neil. He's talking about the one who, is a musician. You know what I mean. I don't believe in banning books, but I do believe it's a parent's choice, not a school's choice, and whether they allow children to read something until that child can decide for themselves. Are you going to force a Muslim child to read a Christian Bible? And Ben Stricker came back. Censorship isn't a good thing. Be it done by a government, corporation, or individual, censorship is bad. Are they also pulling from Pandora and Apple, since they both also have Joe Rogan on them? To which somebody said something which was probably one of the most profound and ridiculous statements in this entire conversation, that it was one of the motives for me finally to make this video. Ethan says, censorship of misinformation isn't censorship, it's democracy. Censorship is democracy. Oh boy. once again, well, it's okay to censor misinformation. You can't you can't go down this road. Humans cannot be trusted with this power to determine what it is and what isn't. Your critical thinking skills need to protect you from that. And if they have to ban something to make their argument, then they didn't argue. It's like entering a beauty contest and disqualifying everyone else and then giving yourself the prize. I mean, sure, you won, but you're still ugly. And just like that, in an argument, sure, you may have won, but you're still wrong. And the reason why this random accusation of racism is put here randomly is because it was just as randomly put into one of the conversations on this Facebook thread. Just randomly, let's call someone a member of the Ku Klux Klan, because of course, if you disagree with anything we say, you're automatically racist, sexist, misogynist, homophobic, again, shotgun shell of oppression. Shoot it all at them and see what sticks. So I'm going to end this by going back to the conversation, also on the Occupy Democrats page that they have up, specifically trying to suggest that, if they're into banning, you shouldn't be into banning books. Banning books is bad, but if you want to ban books, you should ban the Bible. So this is interesting to me because, ironically, it's a perfect example of projection. And I want to say, once again, I'm agnostic. I do strongly believe in separation of church and state, but I also believe in people's rights to have their own religious beliefs. So anyway, can't think of a book that more needs to be closed for good than that composite book attempt to control the human species their specific misguided way. The attempt to control the human species their specific misguided way. Right, like wokeism. How did the Bible and gospel ever earn those credentials from feeding on, the fears of a scared population? Which is exactly what all of this stuff is about. They're trying to frighten the population. You don't want to be fascist. You don't want to be racist. So, you better, if you don't want to see fascism and Nazis taking over the country, you should be afraid of that. And as a consequence, you should just give us control. That's what they're saying. That's the funny thing about all this is it's all so much projection. Anyway, so somebody said, I mean, look at all the past nations who gained power through the forceful spread of religion backed by a military. All wars are started over some religious reason, and so then we come back to what I said earlier about how the left is literally being told that every dictator was a right-wing dictator and that all authoritarianism comes immediately from the right. As this person says in response, all countries that became dictatorships had right-wing extremism take over. To which I respond, oh, you mean like Mao or Stalin? Sorry to break this to you folks, and I actually made this clarification earlier because there are still people who say that communism is censorship or censorship is part of communism. It's not that communists are not engaged in censorship or that they can't. It's important to understand that, once again, whether you're authoritarian or libertarian is separate from what your, preferred economic system is. You could be an authoritarian communist, you could be a libertarian communist. You can be an authoritarian capitalist, you can be a libertarian capitalist. You can engage in censorship as either a communist or a capitalist. It's not one of economic system or the other. But the big point here is that, again, these people on the left are being taught that they don't have to worry, if, in regards to breaking any of the basic rules that George Orwell was actually trying to warn fellow leftists about. They don't have to be concerned because, after all, authoritarianism only comes from the right. And since they don't believe that they're on the right, they think that they're above this and that it could never possibly happen to them. That they are free to engage in censorship, intimidating people, violence, whatever it takes to try to achieve their goals because somehow they believe magically that it's impossible that any of their efforts could ever lead to authoritarianism because they would have to be conservatives or right-wingers for that to be possible. It's absolutely ridiculous, and the right engages in it too. That's why that guy was saying, that he believed that censorship is communism. It's just not. It's just not that simple. You have to understand the difference between libertarian and authoritarian, capitalist and communist. Those things can be blended together, but they are not the same. Anyway, censorship is not okay. It's not okay if you're on the right. It's not okay if you're on the left. And it is, when people are out calling for it, it is a warning sign that some authoritarian something, whether it be left-leaning or right-leaning, is trying to take hold of the narrative. That's something that George Orwell, a socialist, was warning us about in 1984. It's a warning that both sides need to heed, and it's a basic central principle that this country holds dear. We have the right to do this, and again, the problem that I have is that it's a mentality. Once you start to think that it's justified to engage, in simply shutting down the other side of the conversation so that you can again win the beauty contest by disqualifying all other contestants and still be ugly, you know, at that point you have to ask yourself, why is that necessary? Is your position so weak that the only way you have a chance for your ideas to prevail is by ensuring that people don't hear any other ideas? Because that's the direction everything is taking. And the right is capable of doing this too. They just don't happen to be doing it at the moment. The reality is at this point, there's a lot more activism towards authoritarianism going on the left than there is on the right, despite all of the weird suggestions to the otherwise. I've brought on like members of Patriot Prayer, I've talked to Proud Boys. None of them are on board with the idea of a dictator, not even if it was Trump. And they're not on board with censorship, even of people they don't agree with. And if you want evidence of that, the Proud Boys don't show up at left wing rallies and just attack random people because they don't like what they're saying. The Proud Boys show up in response to Antifa doing that. And Antifa believes that censorship is part of their self defense against fascism. So, again, I don't, I'm not a Proud Boy. I'm not a member of Patriot Prayer. I have a friend who's a member of Patriot Prayer. His name is Chandler Pappas. I interviewed him. He was a witness because he was standing right next to Jay Danielson when Michael Forrest Reinhold, member of Antifa, 100% Antifa, murdered him. And he's a good man. And so I judge people as individuals in that regard, but the reality is this is something the left is going to have to own up to, that just because you think you're holding the censorship pen or eraser, as the case may be, doesn't mean that it's somehow less morally repugnant for you to engage in that. And to try to hide behind the idea, well, it's okay if private companies do it, it's a slippery slope. Before long, after that, you're going to be demanding that the government starts doing it. And I've had previous videos that I will link in the cards here on this topic where I expose conversations where leftists finally admit it, specifically around the time that Trump was finally censored. They were all about it, because they don't agree with him. And they would try to defend themselves saying that these social media companies should be allowed to censor anyone they want because they're private companies. Some of them even quoted legislation that Bernie has been trying to get rid of that, that openly, makes corporations into people. Literally quoted that as a point of reference as in a positive for their argument. Bernie's been trying to get that crap repealed forever because now that corporations are people, they're free to spend as much money on political campaigns as they want. So when you're to the point that you're quoting that back to people and you're not even trying to do it ironically, you're saying that it should be acceptable for these private companies to control the narrative because they're private companies, especially if you're going to defend yourself with free market capitalist thought. It just doesn't make any sense, and it sure as hell isn't leftist. It just isn't. And I will stand next to anybody who's being censored, even if I don't agree with them. If censorship is your way, you've become my enemy. It doesn't matter what else we agree on. You have to be able to engage with people and persuade them. That is what this country is about. And I get that. The eagle has two wings, left and right, and it needs two wings to fly, as Dennis Kucinich pointed out when people asked him why he works so closely with Ron Paul. So, anyway, folks, speaking of censorship, make sure that you go to my website. I will put a link in the description, but you should be able to go there by going to v-radio.us. There you will find links to my various other platforms where I upload information, sometimes stuff that YouTube will not allow. For example, one of my recently censored streams is now available on Odyssey and Rumble by popular demand. You guys, a lot of you either missed it or wanted to have access to my stream specifically addressing the issue of why people don't want to work anymore, these fast food and retail jobs, and I get into the real nitty-gritty of why. It was a very popular stream, so I went ahead and went through the trouble of uploading it to both Rumble and Spotify. Not to Spotify. Actually, it is on Spotify. So Rumble, Spotify, and Odyssey. You guys can check it out there. But you can also join all my social media platforms, which is really the only way to be absolutely sure you get notified of my content. I get more and more comments from people all the time who've been telling me that they've been unsubscribed. So if YouTube is your only way of checking me out, you really should start following me on these other platforms. I'm not going to leave YouTube, but it is going to be my intention sometimes just to like do like little theatrical trailers, so to speak, to suggest that maybe you should head over to Odyssey or BitChute or wherever it else is that I have my content up. I would put everything on BitChute, but BitChute doesn't allow really long stuff on there, so I can't get like my 2 3 hour streams on there. I am still researching specifically the little documentary I'm going to do about why our current activism, whether it's racial, gender, transgender, whatever, is actually scientifically going to cause, like scientifically provably, going to cause the opposite reaction. And it is. It's obvious that that's what's happening. I'm working on that. There's just a lot of stuff I need to go through in order to put that out. I'm going to be making some more content. I was sick. First, it was a sickness that just took my voice away, and that wasn't painful. I just couldn't talk right. But now it looks like my gallbladder might have to come out, as if I needed more social problems, or not social problems, more physical problems. I still can't walk right and all that jazz. Which reminds me, if you could please consider supporting this show financially, I would really appreciate it. Unfortunately, Raymond Powell was actually one of my best patrons, and he was giving like $100 a month. So now I'm going to need to find a way to replace that. So if you enjoy this work, please consider supporting me on Patreon, PayPal. I'm not really pushing Subscribestar because you have to get to a certain threshold for you to even get the money. So Patreon and PayPal would be better. If you just want to send it via some other way, Venmo or whatever, just reach out to me and we'll figure it out. And I really appreciate those of you who have been supporting my work. I'm obviously not going anywhere regardless, but things are pretty tight right now. And I'm just marking the days till I can finally get my next tax return, which is pretty much what I've been doing, is just slowly spending my tax returns. I actually spend more money on doing this show than I make from it in most instances, whether it's the equipment or having a Rumble account, like to be able to stream on it costed money. StreamYard costs money, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So thanks again, guys, for tuning into V Radio. And I look forward to hearing all from you. Please make some comments. I like the comments. I engage with comments. Like, subscribe, ring the bell, and share my content. Take care.